The movie kicks off with Julia watching her husband, Manel, who's playing the perfect father figure while babysitting his nephew, Carlos. Manel's got Carlos laughing as they look at his cat, Lucilo, through his phone, showing off his natural parenting skills. Later, as Manel puts Carlos to bed, his sister Belen arrives, thrilled to have her family there. She casually mentions that her husband, Mario, won't make it to see them. On the drive home, though, Manel gets a strange feeling, and his hunch leads to a tense conversation with Julia about starting a family. Julia doesn't buy his "not ready" excuse and doubts his ability to be a good father. Frustrated, they're caught off guard as Julia barely dodges an oncoming car, only for a massive truck to crash into them, leaving them in a horrifying accident. Fast forward a year, and we find Manel now living alone with his cat, Lucilo. Over breakfast, he's ignoring breaking news about a dangerous new virus, TSJ, causing global panic similar to the COVID-19 pandemic. The European Union is considering border closures, and the news warns of the virus's devastating impact, but Manel, lost in thought, is more focused on a letter from Julia, slipping into a quiet sadness. As he walks away, he doesn't notice a TSJ-infected individual lurking on the TV screen, a chilling missed sign of things to come. Later, he meets a couple interested in buying his boat, and while digging for the invoices, he stumbles on Julia's bracelet. It sparks a bittersweet memory of a playful moment with Julia on a boat trip, where the bracelet got tangled and broke as they laughed together. He ties Julia's broken bracelet around the boat as a memory of their last happy moment. Later, Manel heads to a store, ignoring calls from Belen. The atmosphere is tense. He spots a woman frantically grabbing supplies, clearly shaken by the virus threat. That night, he finally catches up with Belen and little Carlos on a video call. When Mario takes Carlos away, Belen drops some big news. Mario's been transferred to the Canary Islands, and they're moving immediately. She urges Manel to join them for a fresh start, but he hesitates, making excuses. Still, Belen's persistence wins him over, and he agrees to spend a few days with them. The next morning, Manel heads out, catching a grim news update. The TSJ virus has mutated, now spreading faster than ever through bites and subcutaneous injuries. At the airport, he reaches out to Belen, letting her know he's en route and can't wait to see them. But just as he's about to board, an announcement rocks the terminal. All flights are suddenly cancelled. Panic ripples through the crowd, and one passenger lashes out, escalating the chaos. Alarms blare on everyone's phones with an emergency alert, fueling the tension further. As security tries to handle the escalating scene, a man grabs a guard's gun, causing a stampede as people rush for the exits. Stuck in the ensuing traffic jam, Manel listens to emergency news updates advising people to avoid certain routes. Beside him, he notices an elderly couple who seem lost and anxious. He offers them help, gently urging them to take a safer route to find their family. With traffic at a standstill, Manel decides to park his car and walk the rest of the way home, eventually reaching his town by evening, only to find his neighborhood crawling with army personnel. To his horror, he spots his infected neighbor, Tebin, being contained by officers. Finally back home, Manel collapses into bed, haunted by a dream of his last moments with Julia. The next morning, Belen calls with grim news. The government won't be reopening the airspace anytime soon, and the army is setting up restricted safe zones. She urges him not to leave his house, no matter what happens. Manel heads out for supplies and is hit by the chaos outside. Inside the store, he finds a stale loaf of bread, but an old man snatches it from him, his wife casting Manel a sad glance. Gathering a few scraps, Manel heads out only to spot an infected officer locking himself in a room. Seconds later, another officer is viciously attacked by an infected. Manel tries to help, but when the infected lunges at him, the officer shoots it dead. Shaken, Manel moves to assist the officer, who insists Manel leave and then takes his own life. Back home, Manel frantically preps his house against infected intruders, following online tutorials. Soon, a presidential announcement declares a national emergency, cutting all communications except radio. That night, Manel watches as the army forcibly evacuates neighbors to safe zones. Belen texts, begging him to avoid the evacuation buses and promising they'll come for him soon. Suddenly, two soldiers burst into his house, trying to convince him to leave. Manel hides, but Lucilo's meowing almost gives him away. Holding his breath, he calms her, and eventually, the soldiers leave, frustrated. 2 weeks later, Manel, running out of food, records a video for Belen. With his fridge empty, he suits up and ventures outside, ready for anything. After scouring a few houses with no luck, he breaks into a neighbor's place and finds Gabriella, an elderly woman. She explains her son left to bring his children to safety but never returned. When she asks if he went with the army, Manel tells her he stayed behind, as his sister had insisted. Sadly, Gabriella asks if he's found any food. He admits he hasn't had any luck either. Luckily, Gabriella, who knows the neighborhood well, helps Manel find houses that still have food. Manel collects what he can and even finds a bike, allowing him to cover more ground. He returns with the little he's gathered, but Gabriella worries it won't be enough, fearing hunger could turn them against each other. Manel remembers one house he missed and hands her a radio to stay in touch. At the house, he senses someone behind him and instinctively shoots an arrow, only to realize it's a survivor. The man bolts, and as Manel retrieves his arrow, he stumbles upon supplies hidden behind a door. That evening, he and Gabriella enjoy a rare hearty meal. They share stories, and when Gabriella mentions her troubled relationship with her son, Manel opens up about Julia, revealing she passed away a year ago and looks at her pictures with Gabriella. Later, Manel falls asleep, only to be woken by Gabriella, who tells him to tune the radio to 100. He hears a broadcast directing survivors to head to Arousa estuary. Gabriella is wary, but Manel urges her to give it a chance, promising he'll take her with him. She silently agrees but looks uncertain. The next morning, Manel gets ready, only to find Gabriella's house quiet. Rushing over, he's heartbroken to discover a note thanking him, and her lifeless body beside it. After saying a sad goodbye, Manel is attacked by a female zombie outside. She gives him a tough time, but Manel barely manages to fight her off. He leaves a message for Belen, then heads out with Lucilo. Riding through the forest, the bike's noise attracts a swarm of infected, but he narrowly escapes and eventually reaches an abandoned campsite, finally taking a moment to catch his breath. As Manel moves forward, more infected swarm him. He speeds off but crashes when he's confronted by a heap of corpses. Checking on Lucilo, he tries to restart the bike but fails, forcing him to flee on foot as the infected close in. Eventually, he reaches the docks and locks the infected out, only to find the boats are all gone. He searches a cabin, finding only a few supplies and some arrows. Just when things seem bleak, he spots a boat. But as he tries to start it, he's shaken by the sight of a baby zombie on board, breaking his spirit. Still, he sends Belen a message, assuring her he's safe and staying strong. Out at sea, the boat stalls, but Manel is soon rescued by 3 Russians who bring him aboard their ship. They offer him food, and he meets Victor, who translates for the ship's leader, Ushakov. When asked about his background, Manel mentions he's a lawyer, but Victor quickly jumps in, claiming he's an engineer instead, warning Manel that lawyers aren't well liked on board. Victor, a Ukrainian pilot, leads Manel to his room and confides that Manel is the only survivor they've picked up so far. That night, Manel hears a family's desperate cries for help. In the morning, he questions Victor about it, but Victor denies anyone was brought aboard, warning Manel to stay quiet if he wants to live. Later, Ushakov interrogates Manel about locations in the area, pressing him for details on a concrete plant. Manel notices a group with guns preparing to leave the ship and sees the family's boat docked nearby. When he presses Victor, he's met with another warning to keep quiet. Manel then shares a plan with Victor. He knows where they can find a helicopter, which could get them both to the Canary Islands. That night, Manel secretly prepares to make his escape. Instead of escaping, Manel chooses to rescue the hostage family. He finds 2 captives and frees them, but the father refuses to leave without his wife and daughter. As he rushes off, Ushakov's associate appears, shooting him down. The gunman turns on Manel, but Victor intervenes, knocking him out. The surviving hostage joins their escape attempt. They tried to flee in a lifeboat, but Ushakov and his men open fire. The hostage is quickly killed, and Victor covers for Manel, taking a bullet himself as they reach the shore. Manel searches for a vehicle and finally finds one, though it has a zombie inside. Victor joins him in the car, explaining that Ushakov only keeps survivors who serve him. They arrive at a hospital, only to find the helicopter gone. Suddenly, a zombie attacks the car, and Manel narrowly fends it off. As more infected close in, he uses Victor's gun to hold them off and gets Victor inside, putting him on a bed. Victor, wounded, asks Manel to remove the bullet. While searching for medical supplies, Manel hears the faint voices of little girls. Following the sounds, he discovers they're hiding in the operating room and manages to communicate with them. Just then, he senses a zombie nearby, which he outmaneuvers and kills before being chased by a horde. Manel escapes back to the operating room and locks the zombies out, only to be terrified when he can't find Victor or Lucilo. Suddenly, a woman named Lucia appears, and as zombies close in, she helps him escape. Relieved, Manel reunites with Lucilo and a still-alive Victor. Sister Cecilia joins them, and with some convincing from Lucia, agrees to help save Victor. Later, Lucia informs Manel that Victor is stable but needs rest. Grateful, Victor reveals they originally came for the hospital's helicopter, and that he can fly it. Lucia's eyes light up and she shows Manel the helicopter, though it's in a risky quarantine zone not safe for the kids they're protecting. During a break, Cecilia, Lucia, and Manel discuss how the young girls lost their parents. After Cecilia leaves, Lucia encourages Manel to face his grief. Manel, saddened, recalls losing Julia here in the hospital. He visits her old room, reliving memories of their last moments together. Apologizing for not cherishing their time, he wraps Julia's bracelet around the bed as a final goodbye, joined by Lucilo before he leaves. As Manel gazes at the helicopter, his phone unexpectedly gets a signal. Overwhelmed, he watches video messages from Belen and Carlos and, moved to tears, sends a message back, promising he'll make it to the Canary Islands soon. Suddenly, he hears Ushakov and his men entering the hospital. Manel rushes to warn Lucia, urging her to lead everyone to the tunnels. Alarmed, Lucia gathers the girls, and they move through the basement toward a recently damaged boiler room. They stay silent until they reach a stuck door. Victor suggests Lucia use her axe, but as the door opens, a zombie lunges and bites Cecilia, infecting her. Lucia kills it, but Cecilia, now infected, insists they go on without her to save the children. Pressing forward, they encounter a horde of zombies. Manel holds them off, helping Lucia, Victor, Iria, and Max get through safely. Layla spots her mother in the distance and screams, catching the attention of a nearby zombie. As the rest of the group reaches safety, the zombie lunges at Manel and Layla. Thinking fast, Manel pulls her to safety, hiding them as the zombies swarm. Just then, Ushakov and his men arrive, shooting down the zombies without noticing Manel and Layla are hiding in a cupboard. Once they're clear, Manel and Layla reunite with their friends. Manel quickly thinks up an escape plan. They fight through waves of zombies, protecting the kids, and finally reach the quarantine area. After locking the zombies out, they scramble into the helicopter. Victor tries to start it, but the zombies are closing in. Manel heads out to hold them off, buying time. Just as Victor manages to start the engine, Ushakov and his men burst in, demanding they get off the helicopter. In a desperate move, Manel opens the door to let the zombies flood in, directing their attack toward Ushakov and his men. The zombies overwhelm them, taking them down in seconds. Manel fights off the remaining zombies as Lucia pulls him aboard just in time, and they lift off, finally safe as they head toward the Canary Islands. On board, Manel receives a call from Belen, and excitedly tells her he's on his way. But Belen's voice is panicked. She begs him not to come, revealing that the virus has already reached the islands. As Manel looks out the window, he sees fighter jets heading toward the Canary Islands, and the movie ends with a chilling sense of dread.